Hello and welcome. I'm Grant Walker. This is a busy time of the year for farmers, but we wanted to bring you this broadcast to outline the findings of the Fonterra Board's independent inquiry following the recent WPC80 precautionary recall. Now with me today, Fonterra Chairman John Wilson, appointed board member Sir Ralph Norris, who chaired the independent inquiry, and Jack Hodder, QC, the author of the report. Firstly, John, it's good to have reached this point and to have the report completed.
It's very, very good, Grant. I mean, I don't need to go back. Yes, this was a false alarm, but we said then, and it is so important now, that we must learn from this event. So pleasingly, this report, which we'll talk about today, builds on the work that we found within the operational review, but there are some absolute findings here, and we want to talk about that today.
All right, well, it's a big report. It's almost 200 pages long, clearly a very big undertaking.
Yes, it is a very, very thorough report. We said at the time that we needed to find out what happened, why it happened, and what we need to learn from that to ensure that the cooperative comes out of this and is far stronger in the future than it has been in the past. Now, I want to thank very much Jack Hodder. Jack led the inquiry team into the whole events of the WPC80 recall and all the events that occurred after that. And I want to very much thank Sir Ralph Norris. Ralph chaired the committee, the oversight committee that the board had that managed that review process, the oversight of that review process over the past 10 weeks. So a huge undertaking. And I think the best thing is that for Sir Ralph to go through how the report was set up, what it covered and who was involved in it, please.
Well, thanks, John. I think the 10 weeks was obviously a lot longer than we initially thought. We thought 5 weeks was going to be plenty, but certainly given the depth of the inquiry, the terms of reference, which were very wide, it gave us an opportunity to really, I think, do a very good job. And certainly the inquiry team, who was led by Jack Hodder, Gabriel Trainer from Sydney, who was a specialist in communications and crisis management, along with Jacob Heider, who was an international dairy consultant from the Netherlands. The three of them went very, very wide indeed in their inquiry. And that inquiry team was oversighted by a committee which was made up of obviously myself, Nicholas Shadbolt, Blue Reed, Simon Israel, John Waller, and we also had the benefit of two external appointees to the committee, and they were Dame Judith Potter, a retired High Court judge, and also along with Dame Judith was Professor Stuart McCutcheon, Vice-Chancellor of the University of Auckland, who is a former research scientist. So a very good oversight committee indeed. And when we look at the scope of the inquiry, it was one that was totally unfettered, and I have to say that the cooperation that came from people inside Fonterra, there were a significant number of people from all levels of the organisation who participated in the inquiry, and they were very, very open, and it was very pleasing to see. And likewise, we had an interaction, or the inquiry team had interactions with probably 30 to 40 other people, other stakeholders of Fonterra who participated in the inquiry as well. So overall, a very comprehensive review, and one that I think has come out with some very good recommendations for Fonterra going forward.
That's right. Well, Jack, let's bring you in here if we can. Can you talk us through some of the findings of the report from your point of view?
Thanks very much. I think it might be worthwhile just saying at the outset that whenever you have a major inquiry like this, any organisation is going to come up with sort of less than 100% perfect on everything it does, and this is true of Fonterra as it is for any other organisation that gets subjected to this kind of scrutiny, and it was subjected to pretty intense scrutiny. So the brief from the board was to do a thorough and independent investigation, and I'm satisfied that's what's happened. We've had access to all the directors, all the senior management. We've spoken to people at the lower levels of the company, and we've spoken to people outside the company. And in the process of that, for those farmers who are going to be far too busy to read a report like this, we've produced a sort of a short form chronology. It only runs to about 30 or 40 pages compared to the long form chronology. And within that, we've identified a series of places where decisions were made which might have been made differently. And if they'd been made differently, we would never have got to where we were. In fact, there are about 20 of those points when you look back with a bit of hindsight, and it's always important to remember how useful hindsight is and the fact you don't have it at the time. But there are about 20 of those points where things could have been done differently. And when you look at those, some themes start to come out about areas that required some attention. And so the core findings that the inquiry came up with, and which has been through the rigorous process that's been outlined by John and Sir Ralph, relate to both operational and governance areas. At the operational level, as people probably have read in the past, there's some issues around the reworking processes and decisions around that. There's some issues around testing and when you test and who knows to know about it, which goes into the topic of escalation. And there's also the issue about tracking the product. Now, most of those things were picked up very fairly and very squarely by the operational review that was done under Teo Spearing's brief and done by Maury Leyland. That was a really good report, and a lot of that work's already work in progress. We've kind of come through behind and confirmed they were the right things to focus on. There's a few more fine tunings we've added to that, but pretty much there's alignment between what we've come up with and what the operational review had done. We've had the benefit of talking on a confidential basis to practically everybody involved. And we've also had the benefit of access to every document we could want to verify every step in the story.
So from these findings then, what's the inquiry committee recommended?
Well, again, the recommendations fall into two broad categories. One is operational. So what do you put in your cleaning in place programs? How do you deal with your risk management programs? Those sorts of things coming into place. I should probably have said in the operational level, Jakob Haider, who Sir Ralph mentioned, who was the Dutch expert who came and joined the inquiry, went through pretty rigorous sort of a character, went through plants in Northland, Waikato, Clandeboye, Victoria, and gave Fonterra's plants a pretty damn good tick. But nevertheless, he has some suggestions, but pretty much they come from him, where things can be done better, and they're set out in detail on the report. They particularly include things around the management of testing and the management of cleaning processes in that area. So there's a range of operational things. Of the total number of recommendations we have, which I think total about 33, about 24 of them I think relate to operational matters. At the minor level they affect the factories and the plants. At the more substantive level they affect the risk management arrangements. One of the things that Fonterra didn't get an A+ for in this exercise was both the planning and the execution of risk management and crisis management. And a lot of the recommendations are focused on that. Some of them won't make entirely comfortable reading to the people involved at the time, but that's what it was, and that's what those recommendations relate to. So we're confident that with some serious attention to those, then Fonterra will be in much better shape to withstand anything remotely like this in the future.
Well, Sir Ralph, has the inquiry team now finished its work?
The inquiry team has finished the work up to the end of the investigation and the recommendations, and they have now been presented to the board, and the board has agreed to accept the report and also has agreed with the recommendations, and those recommendations will now be implemented. To that end, the inquiry committee will reconvene in 9 months' time to assess progress against the 33 recommendations, and then another 9 months later, so that's 18 months later, to again review progress, and we would expect at that time that all 33 recommendations would have been implemented.
Okay, it's going to be monitored. So John, back to you. What are the next steps as far as you're concerned from here?
Well, first of all, Grant, I want to make it very, very clear that the board absolutely accepts the recommendations that are in the report. The board, as I said earlier, is just so grateful, frankly, for the huge endeavour that went in from Jack and the team of Jakob and Gabriel and others to be able to provide this very, very thorough. And as Jack pointed out, when you read it, it certainly causes you to think very, very carefully about what we need to do to ensure we are the world's best food cooperative in the world. So we absolutely accept the recommendations, and so what we will be doing is working to prioritise what needs to be done, and for me it is very important that we'll continue to talk to our farmers about that as we move forward.
So what are your main priorities then?
So the main priorities are to ensure that the operational review is completed, so that gets reported through to the board. So that's what has been talked earlier, the work that Teo and Maury Leyland led and have spoken to our farmers about. The second, to my mind, is to ensure very rapidly that our crisis management is the best in class. And we certainly understand at the time, in a complex recall like we had to deal with, we did not pass the test, and we need to get that right for the future. Thirdly, working through with stakeholders, government, to ensure that we continue to build on the programs we've already got in place and monitor what we are doing to ensure that we're getting the right results going forward. So those, for me, operational review complete, crisis management best in class, and then ensure that we take all stakeholders with us.
And how are you going to track these initiatives?
Yeah, so what we do within the board is we monitor what is occurring, and one of the things that is touched on in the report from Jack is that we need to separate risk and how we oversee risk from a board's perspective out of our current audit, finance and risk arrangement, which our farmers will be very, very familiar with. And so through that risk committee, we need to ensure that we have got the appropriate monitoring, and that more than just the risk processes, but our behaviours, the escalation that's been talked about, that culture is just absolutely embedded across our governance right down into our management and our business.
So do you have any final comments for farmers watching today?
Right from the start, we wanted this report to be totally independent and totally transparent. And so farmers right now can look on the website, and the full report, the full 200 odd pages, is on the website so that can be read. For me, this gives me huge confidence that our cooperative can build on where we are today, Grant. Our cooperative is a very, very strong global ingredients business. This is about how we ensure that we are the world's best food business going forward. So I know our farmers can take huge confidence from this report. Yes, there is some absolutely critical things that we need to take from it, and I can give an absolute assurance to our farmers that your board is absolutely committed to dealing with what is in this report and ensuring we go through significantly stronger for the future.
Thank you, John. And thanks to Rolf Norris and Jack Hotter for joining us today. A reminder that the full report is available on Fonterra's public website at fonterra.com. Thank you for your time.
Good afternoon to you all. Today we are happy to talk to you, Maury, Leyland and myself, on the board inquiry report, which has been shared in public today. First of all, I would like to say that we very much welcome the report, the recommendations, findings and the way forward. But just to put into perspective is from my side that really two pieces to it. That's the findings and the recommendations, and there's basically 23 recommendations. Quite a chunk of those 23 are in line with the operational review. So Maury is going to talk about that in a moment. We see that there's quite some overlap, there's some additionals. So what we would like to do is take the recommendations in and really align them with the recommendations we already had on the table on the operational review, make sure that we have a complete picture and execute actions as soon as possible. These findings will be part of the rebuild plan as well, and we really make sure that we use all the information to rebuild our reputation and to be on top of our game, be best in class around the world. So there's a second block to the board inquiry, and that's really around stakeholder management. The scope which the board took is much wider than the operational review. So the board inquiry committee really looked at stakeholder management in New Zealand but also around the world. In these kind of circumstances, with these events, you have to take the learnings and the findings to make sure that you come out stronger, and that's exactly what we're going to do. Would like to hand over to Maury, and Maury is going to talk about that, the recommendation moving to the operational review and the recommendations going into the rebuild plan. Maury.
Thanks, Teo. I think today we've received a very thorough report, and thorough in terms of the findings and also in terms of the recommendations. So if we look first at the operational review, we shared the operational review in early September with 20 recommendations within it. And those 20 recommendations look at food quality and safety, particularly with respect to our people, our products, our systems and our response. So from the board review today, many of the recommendations within that sit quite directly within some of those 20 initiatives that we have, and a number more, while they fit within the titles of the initiatives, provide us with some clarity and some depth and some real input into how to make those recommendations deeper. As you mentioned, Teo, a number of the recommendations do go beyond the scope of the operational review, because the operational review was designed to very quickly look at the company, look at our own processes and ensure that we were tightening up in a way that an event like this that we really were working to make sure that an event like this couldn't happen again. So there's some particular areas of focus that we're going to have going forward, and as you mentioned in the rebuild plan. First of all, continuing with the implementation of the operational review, which focuses particularly on food safety and quality. So it's quite some time since we released that report, and we've made quite a lot of progress in the implementation. A number of the actions are complete. All of them have plans against them, and there's very strong business ownership from those. So we've made some really good progress. Going forward, what we'll be doing is looking at, I guess in particular, 3 groups of stakeholders. We'll be continuing our work, building relationships with our very important stakeholders in New Zealand. Obviously, with our markets, the markets that New Zealand trades with, we've got further work to do there. And with our customers, our very important customers who receive our product, some of who were affected by the recall. So we'll be continuing to put plans in place to work with those customers. And lastly, and very importantly, we need to have a plan which captures all of those aspects that really take that to our people and make sure that this is felt right through the organisation.
The report is balanced. It took a very wide scope when it comes to stakeholder management. There's a lot of learnings and findings in here which we can use to really move the company forward. And that's what we are going to do, and that's what we are committed to do.